right, let's go ahead and get the meeting started. We're going to kick off with, well, who's going to lead
I
off?
will.
Presentation from the city manager?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We're here tonight for a retreat, which we don't think will take the full 4 hours, because in talking with several of the council members, we know that some of you have other commitments at 6:45 and 7:30. We believe that we may be done by then, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Tonight we're going to hear about the second quarter revenues, and then talk about the dashboard and work through some of the different options that are available. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Terry Canada, who will lead us through tonight's discussion. Terry?
Good evening. It's a pleasure again to be here in front of you. We're going to take a few minutes to review the second quarter financial report. Very similar to the first quarter report in format. You should have received the report in its entirety with your packet. Again, we're just going to go through some of the highlights of the report. See you here?
Let me ask you this, Terry, from questions. You want to go as we go through the sheets? Or you,
Please.
okay.
Yeah. So basically, we're going to review the general fund, break it down into some of the revenue categories, more of the high ticket, the 6 major categories. Again, we'll talk about some of the budgeting trends we're seeing on the expenditure side. Touch briefly on the operating funds for water, wastewater, and sanitation. Once again, we're bringing forward the second quarterly budget transfers. And again, if you have questions as we're going, feel free to ask. Just kind of wanted to start out there, just to kind of to clarify or bring back to the adopted budget that we had was $255 million, which is represented by the entire pie here. We're focusing on the part that's removed, the $70.8 million in operations. It does make up different funds. It's part of it is general fund. Again, HERF, sanitation, water, wastewater, each have a component of an operating budget within their own fund. So I wanted to just point that out, that that's the element that we're focusing in on during these quarterly review discussions. Through the second quarter, which ends in December, revenues are coming in pretty good. For year-to-date, they're at $26.7 million. It's actually a variance of just under $200,000 or under $150,000, about $145,000. The budget for the revenue is weighted. And what that means is you're going to see it's not exactly divided at 50%. The budget for the year is 56.7. And how we figure out the second quarter budget is to take that and trend out what we've received in revenue over the last 5-year period. And the second half of the year is a little heavier when we get more revenue in. So we're expecting, good receipt on revenue this year, being at half of the year at 99%.
Quick question for you on this one. Does that general fund include construction sales tax?
The $56 million does.
The 26 as well?
See, I knew Josh was
I think we talked about this before. It would really be helpful if, on the general fund, if we can break out operating and non-operating. And the reason being is the construction sales tax is used for one time. So in my view, it gives us a better feel where we are operationally. So, and I know you get one check from the state, but it still would be helpful because you'd be able to allocate what percentage of that is construction sales tax. So if you break that out, I think from an operational standpoint, it'd be very helpful.
Okay, and then for I know for this year and prior years, we've actually, that has become part of the general fund revenue. That is, part of it is used for operations at this point, just because of the deficit. So
I realize.
It's not all going to one time.
I know, but our policy states one time, so it would be nice to break that out so we can see how that works.
Okay, and you will see more of that detail in the report itself. It does break out the construction sales tax when you see the major categories. And moving ahead to the expenditures, once again, we're trending pretty close to budget, if not a little bit below. Same as the revenues, we do expect a little higher expenditures in the second half of the year. Personnel is running right on target with half of the payroll posted. Through the year, we're at 47%, 38% for contractual services, commodities running at 40%. It puts the entire general fund budget on the expenditure side at just under 50%.
Let me just real quick on that one. Is it possible, I know it's a little more difficult, but to do a similar comparison as above, can you weight the personnel services, contractual and commodities, because some of them come in, later in the year based on historicals. So instead of comparing the amended budget to the year-to-date, can we compare what the budgeted amount would be for the first 2 quarters based on historicals as a percentage, just like you do the revenue? So we'd have a better percentage, because on some of them I read later on is some of them you expect to be totally expended. So if we were comparing the second quarter budgeted to second quarter actuals, it may be closer than 47% because you expect that all to be expended. So I know it's a little more difficult to do, but it would be helpful, because I know when we talked about the budget committee, they looked at run weights, and we tried to explain to them that some of it, is a little more weighted towards the back than the front. I think it would just get a clearer picture. But I know it's not easy, but it would be helpful if you could come up with something like that, similar to the first half.
Okay.
Did that make sense?
Right.
Okay.
And you are picking up on it that the trend is that in the second half of the year, expenditures are a little higher. But all in all, we're doing good at 47%. Now moving to, again, to the detail on the revenue. This is the top 6 that comprise the majority of the general fund revenue. Property tax is a little low, just for timing. We'll get the majority of that revenue again coming in at second half of the year. Sales tax is running high, which is good. We also had some good news. We received the Christmas sales, which we've been waiting for, and it is stronger than expected. The couple of the states here are running a little bit below, and we continue to watch that. We don't have the projections from the state yet for the fiscal year 12, so we will keep an eye on those. And then the building permit and inspection fees are running a little bit behind budget. We noticed that I think we projected about 500 and some units for new construction, and it's coming in at average of, or projected for the year about 400. So that is running a little bit low.
Terry, there was a report yesterday about sales tax, January sales tax revenues. The Christmas sales in December are not reflected in this number, is that correct?
Correct.
So the Christmas sales get paid to us in January, early February, and that'll be third quarter revenue.
Correct. They will post in January's receipts.
Thank you.
But again, we do have the numbers, and they are stronger than expected.
Right,
So it's
right.
good news.
Which is good news.
Terry,
Down here.
and I apologize for being late. The other ones that were negative on that last slide, if you could go back.
Yeah, right there.
Like the auto lien tax and the state shared revenues, and the other 4, is that because that we're falling behind on those, or is it just the same thing as like the property tax, it's just when it's reported?
No, the state shared sales tax, is that true for those?
I would say that's the trend.
I know that the Autolu is coming in. It's just lower than they're receiving lower at the state than they had anticipated. They give us the estimates in March every year, and so this is activity again through December, 9 months after the estimate. It is just running low.
Okay.
The urban revenue sharing, okay, I'm sorry, the one that's right above the Autolu, that one is predicted 2 years out, and we know it's pretty stable, and it usually runs 1/12 every month we get in.
Do you expect that property tax gap to close, that 199?
You know,
or
that one's really interesting. I would always say yes. With this year, the caveat that we have so many foreclosures, we're not sure how that it's affecting the payment. I mean, if people are foreclosing, they're not paying their property tax. The good news is eventually we're going to get that revenue in.
Because historically, we were, 98, 99%?
We're always at 100.
100, yeah.
And we're at 94. That's what kind of worries me on some of the foreclosures there, whether that closes or not. Okay.
Yeah,
So
we'll
this
eventually get it in.
145 is pretty much the actual. We're not doing any catch-up.
Catch up.
Everything is, when you say the 145 is the total general fund revenues that we're in.
We're at 99% trended through 6 months of the year.
Okay.
So we're running slightly behind.
And some of that also includes the construction sales tax, so if you took the construction sales tax out and everything else, and I know we had talked about earlier on some of that coverage, but would that 145 be positive, flat, if construction sales tax wasn't in that sales tax number?
Well, it's just like, for the third quarter, we're going to report the January
Right.
sales taxes. That's going to push us into
Positive
positive
territory. But would you be in positive territory right now if construction wasn't in there?
It's the permit revenue that's running low, that's dragging it down. Everything else is pretty strong.
Okay.
It's probably the most variant, or highest negative variance is the permit revenue, building.
How do we compare to other cities as far as revenue is concerned? Do you have any handle on that?
I don't know that you,
As far as what they're
At 6
bringing in
months.
for their estimates,
How do they compare to our report here, would you say?
I don't know.
Okay.
Larry has any comments?
No, I've read some articles in the newspaper, I don't know if it's Gilbert or a couple of the others that have sizable, or had sizable,
I know Tempe does.
maybe it's Tempe, I'm thinking about, had sizable deficits, much larger than what we're talking about here, so.
And it kind of depends on the makeup of the percentage of what type of revenue they have. But our retail is fairly strong. Our retail and restaurant and bars is fairly, you can't hear him, Paula? Is strong compared to a lot of the other cities. I just wanted to point out here again, we talked during the first quarter that salaries are 73% of the total budget. Contractual services runs at 24% of the budget. Again, we do expect that some of those payments will be later in the year. And then commodities are at 3% of the budget. Interesting to note here that as far as moving forward to the year, we've trimmed the budgets back so much that through year end we don't expect to have near the savings that we would have. We're going to run pretty close in contractual and commodities. People are spending where they're at in their base budgets more closely than they have in the prior years. So with that said, we continue to monitor all the revenues we meet every month. Again, we just got in the sales for Christmas with a positive note. We adjust the revenue estimates and projections going forward based on what we're seeing every month. On the expenditure side, we're meeting quarterly with the departments. We just finished the quarterly review and went over this data in detail by line item. We're looking for any savings that could possibly be in there, realigning the base budgets to reflect the spending, identify efficiencies where possible. Just a quick glance at the revenues for the other funds. They are coming in strong with the exception of water. And what's happening there is your conservation program is in full gear, and we are noticing less use, which should benefit on the expenditure side because it should reduce the cost of producing the water. All the other funds are targeting right on as expected. A note on the sanitation revenue, we did have a kind of an extended effort to go out and collect on the accounts that aren't necessarily part of our water system. I think it's north of I-10, and so we added some accounts that were not being collected for. So that's probably why the increase in revenue there, which is good.
On the water side, Terry, 85%, are there any increases expected to the end of the year that will change that 85%, or are we looking at a significant shortfall on that particular account come June 30th?
No, we do have another increase that goes into effect. And again, what you're just seeing is the high water users are tapering back on their use. We are anticipating year-end revenues to be below our budget.
How much? Any idea right now? Or?
No, I don't know.
But what you're saying is on the flip side, though,
Next table will be the expenditures, which
Right,
are
which-
coming in at 38%.
And of course, the 38% probably reflects the foreclosures as well and the water use.
But
Yeah, actually, Joe, for year-end right now, we're estimating not quite $1 million, about $900,000 under budget.
900,000? Any impact? I know last year we had talked about some of those fund balances out there. Any impact as far as the future scheduling of rates with that 900,000 shortfall, or are they going to be able to absorb by some of the cuts in that water budget?
Yeah, we've had savings from the prior year's expenditures, and so right now that fund is strong. We have budgeted to push all the debt over there, and for the next 2 to 3 years, they're in balance.
Okay. So, and again, as I recall, next year, all debt will be covered, water and sewer debt will be covered by the enterprise funds.
Correct. That's the plan budget is that way. There's also, the rate increases are tiered, and so you'll see those, I think we're in the second of 4 years, and so you'll see that the revenue will increase as we go on in the next couple of years. Like I said, I think this was just dramatic because of the high users, and it was such a shock to them.
Terry, we've allocated all the overhead and administrative overhead, the direct and indirect costs into the water budget now.
Yeah,
So
we
that
actually do.
all the services that the city provides to the water department are reflected in the rates, both revenues and expenditures.
Right, we actually do it for sanitation, water and wastewater.
So in essence, all the enterprise funds are running as true enterprise funds, and in next year's budget, even the debt will be covered by the enterprise fund itself.
Correct.
Thank you.
The one, I guess, change in that is technically the stadium is called an enterprise fund through accounting practices, but it's not, it's just not self-sufficient.
This is Public Works that we're discussing. Stadium's another issue.
Yes, but the other three are being charged overhead, and the debt will be, is budgeted, it's
That's
planned
fine.
to be in the fund.
That's fine. People get what they pay for.
And just the other side of that, you can see that at roughly halfway through the year, everybody is coming in within budget. You'll see water is a little bit lower. I know they do have some routine maintenance that's coming up, and so we don't anticipate there will be a great deal of savings there, but they are running a little below budget. And there is a report on the attached to the quarterly report that has the budget transfers in detail. I'll be happy to answer any questions anyone may have. Again, just to remind you, these are transfers that are administrative in nature. They are between funds, between departments, and any capital improvement projects that may require funding transfers.
I had one question on the transfer. Did you want to ask that now? The transfers?
Sure.
I was just, do not recall, it says transfer number 11-00666, page 19, 425,000, and it said a new CIP project, funds not budgeted, so I didn't know what that was. Page 19. 125,000.
It's a water.
What page?
Can we get back with you on that? I just know it's a water project. I want to say it has to do with the railroad crossing and putting a pipe under. Is Jerry here? I think it has to do with, we can confirm it.
It's
but
the Litchfield Road conduit that's going under the railroad. Is that the one?
That's what I think it is. Is Jerry here? Jerry Postimo?
Yeah, he's coming up.
Okay. There's two we did. I'm not sure which one it is.
Here it comes.
And it wasn't budgeted because we didn't at the time realize we were going to need to do this.
Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah.
It was $125,000 transfer.
Put your mic closer.
Hello. $125,000 transfer. It just says CIP funds not budgeted.
My recollection is that that's for the railroad crossing, to put a water main underneath there on Litchfield, and the reason for that was the railroad's going to be doing one-time work. It's going to be cheaper for us to excavate it with an open excavation rather than come back later doing jack and bore. Jack and Bore would be about 2-3 times as much money.
That's on Litchfield Road.
Correct.
Okay,
Yep, just north of MC 85.
Thank you.
so in summary, the general fund revenue, again, is coming in right on budget as we expected. The expenditures are running a little bit slow, expected to pick up in the second half of the year, but good news is we're on budget on both sides. That concludes the presentation on the quarterly financial report. If there are any other questions.
Well, all in all, we appear to be in pretty good shape, right?
We do this year.
Just a couple quick notes I have on here. On the overtime budget, at some point when those numbers are in and we get spring training through, we'll be able to determine what percentage of those applies to the ballpark versus PD, because I know that was an issue last year about PD and fire overtime. So-
Yes, we are keeping track of those separately so that we can, in the future, operate it truly as an enterprise fund.
Okay.
So they will be paying for their own, but we'll let you know that.
Okay. Yeah, I realize it's upside down already, but it's, I think, Councilmember
we've
Osborne
said
had
that.
raised that at one time. We'd still like to know what those costs are associated with the ballpark. Okay, I think I'm good. Oh, one more quick question. I've noticed going to the gas pump today, gas was about $3.22 a gallon, if I recall. Seems to be on the rise. From a public works standpoint, is that going to create any kind of problem for the police cars, fire trucks that we know of as far as the budget is concerned as we close?
It won't create a problem, but it is certainly going to impact us as additional costs go up. So, but we are able to manage that within our budgets.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving ahead on the agenda tonight, we're going to go ahead and have an overview of the moving ahead to fiscal year 12, a little bit on some economy, both nationally and locally. Property tax information. We just received the estimates for 12 budget moving forward from the assessor's office. Want to talk about that for a bit. Basically on the structural deficit, kind of get into a definition of what that is and what makes up the two elements of that, and looking forward, how that's impacting us. Some budget considerations, a little follow-up on what Joe was talking about, some increased costs that we already see on the horizon, how we're going to deal with those, and then some policy discussions on service levels, funding strategies, and kind of closing the gap because we are expecting the deficit to continue. And then Anna's going to finish this up with a vibrant discussion on the dashboard and doing some tax planning scenarios again, and that would be excitement. Just want to touch on the budget calendar again. It is like I said, you'll see this is getting pretty familiar. We just want to keep on track here. We're at the work session in February. A couple more work sessions coming up in March. We are planning a public meeting for a public forum type thing for budget discussion later in March. Final work sessions will finish up in April. Hopefully we can then balance out the budget moving into May, have the tentative adoption, final adoption in June, and property tax levy adoption in July. Just want to show some brief slides here. We'll kind of move through it quick unless you have some questions, but just kind of to keep in front of you the state of the economy, how we got here, worst recession in a number of decades. This is actually right from Westmark economic forecast presentation of about a couple weeks ago, three weeks ago or so. This one is basically consumer confidence. As you can see, it's all over the board. It hasn't quite hit the low of the 80s, but definitely a drastic decline since we were prospering in 2005. This one actually is unemployment claims. Again, it's going the other way, which is negative, but it's going up. We haven't quite hit the peaks of the 80s, but you can see it's parallel. It's pretty close to the devastation of the recession 20 years ago. It's 30 years ago. Job openings continue to plummet. We do see some relief, and as I get into the slides and we move more to the local economy, you'll notice that we're picking up a little bit faster and stronger, as demonstrated in the previous decades. But here in Arizona, we tend to bounce back a little bit quicker than the rest of the nation does. This one is new housing starts. No surprise here. Again, it plummeted. A little bit of activity in 10. We're not seeing the recovery in this area locally or nationally. Although we tend to bounce back good when we go down far. We ranked, almost top of the state here in lost jobs. No surprise here again, just because of the demographics and what our businesses are. A lot to do with construction and building. This is current. We are moving back. We're 12th as far as job growth goes. Again, it's probably good news.
See, the West Coast still has some issues there, with Nevada still being 50.
Does the immigration figure into that number at all?
The immigration.
Yeah. People leaving the state to go back to their home
I
territory.
I would not know that if it does. My best guess would be no.
Okay.
We're not counting. Here, just to demonstrate again, we bounce back fairly good. You can see the severity over the decades, bounced to 49, and we're again recovering probably better than the national average. Although the outlook is not as bleak as it was, we still do have budget problems both at the state and, within Goodyear we are facing a deficit. Population is the key to getting back in the housing market, closing up the foreclosures, starting some new builds. Unemployment is not quite as high in Goodyear as it is throughout the state. And this is actually a statewide look at 3 more years to recover.
What is our most current unemployment, if you have it?
6.3%.
And when was that? I'm sorry. I know what you guys.
That was last month.
Okay, so it's pretty recent then. Okay.
That's Goodyear.
In Goodyear. Maricopa County is 9.2%. Arizona's 9.3%. And National was 9.8 at the time, so National's come down a little bit.
What was ours again, John?
6.3. Very, very good. We are the lowest. We're bouncing back and forth between Peoria and Goodyear as being the 2 lowest in the entire metropolitan area.
Good, thank you.
Okay, now moving a little more local here. This is a 5-year gross sales trend, and you can see here is just to demonstrate, if the mouse will come, we just kind of want to show the U and what we're doing as far as major categories here. This one is restaurant, which would include restaurant and bars. It's a little bit stronger than some of the other taxes that we have, the sales taxes. Mainly due to we have a lot of new businesses. It seems like when one shuts down, another one comes in, which is good news. This one probably not so good. This is a contracting, and you can see this is just fell right off the charts. It does seem to be through the year stable. We are hoping that there will be a little boost in this revenue source through some construction projects that are coming in, namely I-10 and then
303?
The 303 project will produce
303
heavy
I-10.
construction sales taxes over the next 3 years.
But again, this is probably the most dramatic.
What are we expecting the sales tax or construction sales tax to come in this year?
3.4 million,
3.4 million? Okay. What did we budget?
3 million.
Oh, so we expect construction sales tax to be a little better
Yes.
than what we budgeted? That's good.
John, when they start building the mall, it'd probably be in the next fiscal year, right?
Yes.
do we get the sales tax, construction sales tax? When do we get paid that? At what portion through the process? How's that
During
done?
the construction,
So it's periodically
Yes.
throughout?
But didn't we already receive some?
not for the construction
Not
sales
for
tax.
construction, what was that? The 1
The
million?
payment was for
1.5?
the permit fees, as I recall.
Permit fees?
Does that come directly to us, or I go to the state and then the state sends them to us?
It goes to the state, and the state sends it
State
to us.
sends
yes.
it.
John, Mike.
I'm sorry.
The mic.
I'm sorry, pardon me. Yes, Mr. Cavalier, it goes directly to the state and comes to
And
the
then
city.
we get it from them. And they send it at the end of every month.
That's correct.
Okay, if there are no questions, I'll move ahead and kind of change gears and talk about the assessed valuation, what we're seeing in the property taxes. Again, we just received from the assessor's office the valuation going into next year. It did drop. You can see the percent change in both the primary and the secondary. Once again, as of 4 years ago, we were steadily climbing, and then with the economic downturn, this area also was hit.
Quick question on that one. What is the commercial assessed value, what are they assessed at now? Is it 16%, 21?
Rate.
Is that going down this next fiscal year? Is that part of the graduation, going down? What will it go down from? 20 is the floor? So it's at 21 in 10, 11, and 11, 12, it'll be 20? So not only is the assessed valuation going down, but also the calculation as well? Is that how I'm reading this?
Let me answer that, just so people can hear. The answer to that is, this number does reflect that decrease, so that will not be a future adjustment. But yes, that does factor in those changes in the commercial.
Okay. I guess there's a lot of bills right now at the state legislature. Are there any to drop it any more past 20 at this time, did you know of?
I believe that there are some bills that would drop it in future years, but none that would impact our fiscal year 11-12.
But that doesn't impact us until the next year, right? What happens now?
You mean any bills in the legislature?
No, evaluation.
The valuation will impact us starting July 1st for that fiscal year.
Okay.
And when is that valuation from? When was that one? Because I know it lags a couple years.
2010. Yeah, that's January 1st, 2010 is what this one is.
So we still have, about at least 3 more years? Because housing prices are still going down, so that gives us 2 to 3 more years at least of them going
I
down.
think it's safe to say that map or that graph on the chart hasn't reached the bottom yet, or at least that's the assumption.
Has not.
And has not for residents or has not for commercial? Or both?
Probably
Just
both,
the total assessed valuation, I think we could assume at least 1 more year dropping,
Drop.
just based on local market conditions. The
Yeah.
assessor has scheduled a meeting to meet with us finance types in March to discuss those issues, and they'll probably give us an indication. And that's when each of us should also get our individual home assessments, and that'll start to give you a trend right then of what that's going to be.
Larry,
We're
what-
speculating before that.
What controls that? It just seems to be so off the wall. Is there an agency? I know the national economy and all this, but it's just like, it's the same thing that bothers me with Wall Street. What controls that? What controls this thing up and down?
I guess first of all, the Maricopa County Assessor's Office controls the numbers. But what controls the market, I'll take completely the fifth on that. All of the market conditions. The Assessor's Office does their best to keep a handle on the market. They look at comps, they look at appraisals. A couple years ago, they told us they had to start adding foreclosures into the mix because it dominated the sales at that point, and that's one reason it dropped as far as it did. I imagine that trend has continued. They're required by at least state law, if not the Arizona Constitution, to be at least 80% of the true value of the house when they give their full cash value.
So that, I guess the question keeps coming to me is, our assessed valuation keeps dropping, but our taxes are higher.
Actually, in Goodyear, that wasn't true. My property tax bill went down by about a third this past year.
Really?
Yeah, and the city's portion of that went down, I think mine's down $200 from
Yeah, mine's
just a
down
couple
$200.
years ago. But my total property tax bill is down, I want to say it's about $600 or $700 from last year to
Guess
this
I better
year.
have mine looked at.
Yeah, mine, I know mine's at least 600. I think it was even lower than that, dropping 600 to 700.
Mine was also.
Yeah, so, yeah, you might want to take a look, because, yeah, mine
You have
dropped
given the
significantly.
citizens a tax break. And we don't even have to work at it.
Yes, yes.
It's very important that you speak into the mic so that people who are watching this at home on their computer understand what you're saying.
So I skipped ahead a couple slides just to kind of highlight the comment that Frank had about the taxes. This chart just shows by zip code that the taxes have decreased, and part of it is due to the valuation decline, and then also there was a change in the rate last year. So just kind of wanted to highlight that. Oops. Just a reminder, there's two components to the property tax. The primary part goes to fund the general government activities, which include fire, police, legal, city manager, purchasing, accounting, all of the general fund activities, and the second part is to pay for the general obligation debt. The property tax rate for fiscal year 11, the current year, was approved at 1.42. It is the lowest it's been in a number of years. It was an 11% decrease from the year before. It did result in less property tax paid by the homeowner. And a reminder, the policy as set by the city council is 1.6 or less.
If I read this correctly, even though the rate looks like the estimate is up, the actual levy is, overall levy is dropping by almost $1 million.
Correct.
So on average, it's, well, I mean, I won't know until I get my tax bill, but it looks like on average, my bill's still going to go down.
That's correct.
It will. And this is just historical over the last 13, 14 years. Predominantly, it's been at 1.60. The rate has been in 11. It was approved at 1.42.
But to me, always the key, and that's one of the issues, you know, from a policy standpoint, I was always concerned about, is the actual levy is the tax we collect, so the rate is a mathematical byproduct of that tax we collect, which is a calculation. So from my perspective, the actual tax we're going to collect is going to go down by $1 million. So somebody somewhere is going to see their tax bill go down because we're collecting less taxes.
Good segue, Joe. You could be the straight guy here. So this, moving ahead, is the estimate for next year. Again, we just got, and it does, just like you said, go down. The debt service remains pretty constant at about 4.5. The rate is set this year was 1.4. Moving ahead with an estimated rate at policy, it would be at the 1.6 to cover the debt service. Just wanted to note that the 1.6 at policy is just a little bit short to cover the total debt for the year, and there would be fund balance available to cover that of $178,000. This is the chart I moved ahead to. If anyone has any questions, said it does demonstrate a 4-year decrease in property taxes paid by the homeowners.
What is this estimate, this average based on here? Is there a dollar value of the home?
Yeah.
I think it's 200.
2011.
Yeah, the comparison here, what's the value of the home?
For 2011, for zip code 85338, the median home value is 104,000, and for 85395, it's 184.
Okay. So it's medium home price is what we're using for
Yes,
these comparisons?
from the
All right.
assessor's
Okay.
office.
So still showing they're going down from one year to the other.
Yes.
This chart is a comparison of Valley cities, as you can see, for City of Goodyear, we're right, it's alphabetical, we're right in the middle. We're also pretty close to the middle of the tax rate, too. A few cities are higher. Some are,
Well, when we
some are
flip
lower.
back up to the 1.6 rate, we're going to be up there too, though. I mean, it looks like only Phoenix is higher than us. Because we're going to flip back up to the 1.6, aren't we? In 1 year.
Yes.
So we're going to be back up there again.
That would be a policy to cover the debt. A number of factors come into play here. It's a complicated formula depending on what the valuations are. They probably haven't dropped in some of the other cities as much.
Are a lot of those like the floating rate? Is that how a lot of the other ones are working, where they're
Well, and
staying
you
lower,
can
or-
see that if you look, that some of them are pretty standard all the way across. And then there was a tax change, and I think it takes effect in 2006, where you'll see that the rates have changed. And again, it's a complicated formula, just depending on the amount of debt they have outstanding, their valuations, which way they're going, and what their policy is on how much debt they'll extend.
So we're still highest.
I don't know if you know this. Do we have more debt outstanding than these other cities, or how do we compare on that? I don't know if you know that.
I do not know.
Okay.
All the debt is governed by state statute, constitution, by percentage of your availability to pay is actually what it is.
Okay.
Any questions on this, on the property tax? So moving ahead into the 12 budget, just kind of wanted to set some framework of what we're looking at, some considerations, and then again, moving into some policy discussions. So moving ahead, we do expect a projected deficit for 12. This has been going on for a couple years. It basically started with the decline in revenues, which I think that the previous slides demonstrated quite well. The technical definition is that the reoccurring revenues are not enough to cover the reoccurring expenses for day-to-day operations. The other thing that adds to this is that we finally have reached the bottom of the U, if you will, and we are seeing some slight growth on the other side, but it just isn't in the percentages we had seen before. We were at double digits growth for the last, prior to 8, probably the last 5, 6, 7 years, and we're just not seeing that. We've also taken on additional financial obligations, which further put it out of balance. So I want to just discuss a little bit here the reoccurring revenues, kind of what makes up the money that we use to spend for day-to-day operations. Of course, we have lengthy discussions about sales tax. They're somewhat volatile, but here in Goodyear, we're pretty lucky that they're not as drastic of swings as they have been statewide. They do remain strong. Again, Christmas came in, it's pretty good. We have not actually decreased. Our tax base in sales tax for the last few years has remained somewhat flat other than the construction sales tax. Franchise agreements, we have a couple with some neighboring utilities. That remains strong. It's pretty stable. We are seeing a little fluctuation because of the, again, I think it's due to the foreclosures and just less consumption, whether it's Southwest Gas or water or utilities. The other thing is audit recovery. That's when we go out and we do the sales tax audits and we get taxes in where people haven't paid from beforehand or that they owe us from back taxes. State shared, we talk a lot about the auto loop urban revenue and state sales tax. Again, those are estimates that are forwarded from the state and they'll be forthcoming in March. But we do count on that. I think it's about, I want to say 13% of our revenue. Fines and forfeitures, license, those things come from, a lot from the court. It's probably $800,000 that comes from the court. Some licenses from different areas within the city, different departments charge for licensing, and then our community development revenue. So all of these things combined make up the general fund revenue. that we use for day-to-day operations. Are there any questions on any specific revenues?
I actually did from the financial report. I had noticed that, let's see if I can find it. Page 6. We were considerably down in rentals and, let's see, rentals, recreation fees, not recreation fees, rentals and aquatic fees, and I wasn't sure if that was due to timing or for what reason people are rentals something to do with parks, things like that. Obviously, aquatics is, but is the aquatic fees due to timing, and are the rentals due to timing of the year? That's my question, because my concern is it relates back to the fee structure. If people aren't renting, and that's why we're seeing this decrease, is it because the fees are too high? So that's my question.
The rental is comprised, there's actually some other off-site rentals that we do, that we collect rent from tenants. Some of those leases have expired, and so that's why some of the rental revenue has went down. The aquatics pool-related stuff is seasonal, and so you'll see a
So we'll see
larger
a
amount of
difference in
that
the next-
in the summer.
Okay.
And I know that from a revenue standpoint, from the fees, the level of fees, we project right now that our recreation fees will produce a surplus of approximately $31,000 over our budget. So we're very strong on recreation fees right now.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. It's a different type of rentals, but we have so many investors that are coming in and buying some of these foreclosed properties that they're re-renting. Do we require, like I know some cities require them to register these properties and pay a sales tax on the rentals? Do we do that, and do we collect those?
Yes, we do, and the council lowered that. Last year it was from 3 to 2. So if you have 2 or more rentals, you have to pay for it. We did not take it down to 1, and the legislature now is taking a look at that, and they're looking at making some changes. I don't know what those changes are, but
Do we require them to register the property so we know where they are?
Yes,
and
we do.
everything? Okay.
Well, and it was because we had it at 2 because some people are just stuck with a home that's really not an investment property, but that was due to the economy, correct? So that's what, yeah.
yes, that's one viewpoint.
So on the other side, the reoccurring expenses, just kind of, again, to recap what goes in to make up the structural deficit. Of course, it pays for the salaries and payroll expenses, insurance, retirement, contractual services. I always like to say, what does it cost to keep the lights on, the utilities, cleaning, landscape, any consulting fees that we have, cooperative agreements, 911, jail costs. And then, of course, the commodities, which is a small part of the budget. But it is what we need to do our jobs. It would include such things as uniforms, tools, safety equipment, fuel, parts for the cars. We do have debt obligations out of the general fund for PIC payments. And then, of course, not to be forgotten, there are some support items that are subsidies to other funds, such as the stadium and HER for some street maintenance. So all of these expenses, again, reoccurring, what it costs to keep government running. So just kind of to demonstrate here pictorially, the revenues and expenditures back in 2008, we were pretty much in line. A couple of things happened between now and then. One, development has really fallen off and taken a major hit and caused a great decline in our revenues, upwards to about $20 million. Simultaneously to that, we've cut budgets to try to move back on that, and then we did absorb the additional cost of the ball stadium. So what we're seeing now, the 3-4 years, budgets 9, 10, 11, moving forward to 12, we still remain in the structural deficit, which is, again, is just to say that the ongoing revenues we're bringing in for day-to-day activities are not sufficient to cover the expenditures. Good news is, with some assumptions that we've used in our modeling, that we are seeing light at the end of the tunnel, and within a few years we do expect that through revenue enhancement and some increased projects and so forth, that the revenues will be moving up, and if we can maintain our expenditures at a good, safe, conservative level, we should be back out of the deficit in a few years.
This is a question on this graph. Excuse me. In the budget 011 and budget 012, the green, the expenditures, we see a slight increase. Can you tell me what you project that to be?
Between 11 and 12?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be modeled after the sales tax scenarios that we're going to be doing pretty soon. And I think the expenditures are in the modeling done at 4%.
So you still don't have the base identified?
We are balancing to the base budget of this year.
Okay.
And then in the next couple slides here, we'll show there are some considerations, and then whether it's, we're obviously going to generate some policy discussion on how to fund these increases or absorb them. So the idea is to get to that in a couple slides.
Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but does your model here, you said some modeling, does it include the construction? We talked about sales tax for the 303 and the mall, or that's not in this graph yet?
Do you know the construction sales tax? I think it is.
Okay.
I think it is. Generally, for modeling purposes, we don't break that out. Just because, again, we don't have enough revenue to cover the day-to-day operations, and so we're using the one-time revenue to cover ongoing expenses. So again, Joe, this is a good segue. So some of the things we're looking at to kind of get on your radar, and we're going to try and balance out in the budget. We do have increased costs for daily operations. Similar to your house, we have increased costs for electrical. Like Joe was saying, the fuels went up substantially. Southwest Gas. Our own water prices have went up through our rate increases. We have a number of parks we water, and so that's costing us more money. We have some co-op agreements for public safety that will also have increased costs that are not in the budgets now. A couple capital projects we do forecast. We have put in the 5-year to cover the cost of the capital projects operating, but they're not in the budgets today. So there will have to be some trade-off or bridges and funding there, gaps, if you will. And then, of course, insurance costs, which seem to be never-ending and come before you every year.
What was when we bought we took over the electric maintenance from APS. What was it that bought us? I can't remember why we did
It was
that.
going to save us approximately, as I recall, Councilmember Cavalier, approximately $243,000 a year, and it cost us $420,000 to purchase it. So that's why it was a payoff in less than 2 years.
Okay, so that's okay. And that's over a 2-year period.
Yes,
So we won't see the results of that for about third year.
I would say yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's my understanding the capital came out of one pot, so you should see a drop on the
Well, that's
operating,
true,
the operating
yes.
expense of two. So you should see some drop in that. But the question I have is the water. I guess the Lipsco rate. Do we know what that's going to cost us, or any idea what that's
We
going to
still
cost?
don't, because they're appealing that rate, as you know, and so they haven't made their final decision. But we do have an estimate
What does that
of
have to do with us?
We have areas.
381,000 is a figure that comes to my mind.
In what areas? Is it the parks north of 10
Yes.
that uses their water? Okay. So what was that estimate again?
As I recall, it was 381,000.
So we are a customer of them.
We're probably the largest customer of Liberty.
I thought about the parks, yeah.
What was it before? What would the increase have been then, if it's 310?
Oh, it was 64%.
Okay, so it's 64%.
Yeah.
Then.
In addition to the budget considerations that we are having discussions with now and trying to, like I said, some of that we're trying to move around funding, absorb, bridge the gap, if you will. We'd like to introduce some policy items that will be coming forward. I'm just going to go ahead and read off the slide here. The employee benefits service levels. We will be considering new contracts for the Sonoran Valley services, right-of-way enhancements. We want to have discussions on equipment and replacement funds. We're gracious enough to fund, I think it was $1.5 million last year to keep that going for fleet, mainly public safety, police vehicles, and IT needs. Discussion on street maintenance, level of service there, and maintaining adequate streets throughout the city, and then priority services, any council initiatives that you may be thinking of, and we also have a public meeting scheduled that may provide some feedback on public input.
And what we're looking at under service levels, the Sonoran Valley Services, we're looking at the cost trade-offs of negotiating a new contract with Maricopa, which we aren't sure that they're going to realistically approach us at the bargaining table. And we pay right now roughly $76,000, and they have made it known to us that that is not enough money. We're also looking at the costs of going to as the residents in Mobile asked when you were down there last time, they asked us to at least go to a two-person crew for emergency medical services that would be Goodyear firefighters. And so we're looking at those costs, and they would probably cost $150,000 to $200,000 more than what we're paying right now. And that would put the services back in Goodyear's hands and put the relationship between Dr. Wood and Mobile School and the residents to the Goodyear firefighters. The fire services would be provided by Maricopa based on their automatic aid response that they are now a part of because we got them into that system. So that's what we're looking at, and we're doing those analyses right now, and so we'll be bringing back our recommendation to you with relation to that along those lines. The right-of-way enhancements we're talking about, we've done cost estimates for the right-of-ways that are lacking in improvements that we've never finished, such as Van Buren, and those areas that you have all asked us to take a look at and upgrading them to a standard that would be acceptable to the city. And we've estimated that the costs would be about $4.3 million total to bring all of the areas up to the city standard. Obviously, we can't do that in one time. We don't know if we can do that in multi-years, but we're taking a look at that from the standpoint of the expenses that we'd be required to undertake. The replacement, as you'll recall, the council approved a $1.5 million budget expense last year for the fleets. We've spent approximately, I believe, $1.1 million, so we have roughly $400,000 left in that, and so we'll have to take a look at that $400,000 in addition to what the needs are for the fleet and for the IT. We're taking a look at asking our computers to get another year or two out of them, but we're worried about some of our servers. So we're taking a look at all of those, and to lose a server is unacceptable, and so we're trying to estimate what those costs will be right now. And then the priority services, if there's other council initiatives that you all desire us to take a look at, we're anticipating working with you on those.
You bypass street maintenance. What?
Street maintenance, in our last session with you, we talked about the decreasing costs. We're at 85% right now, I think. And as it decreases, the costs go up, but we're about $1.5 million short right now. And so we're taking a look at how much further can we go down and how much do we have to put into that to help offset those costs right now. But there will be increased costs for street maintenance services.
John, so I understand this correctly. Okay, right-of-way enhancements are $4.1 million to get all the deficient streets.
4.3. Yes.
4.3 to get all the deficient streets up to standards, and then we're looking at another 1.5 million plus to do regular street maintenance on streets that are deteriorating at this point in time. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and then last, one other question on the 150 to 200,000 of EMS services. Is that just operations and maintenance? And do we have a truck, or do we have do we have to buy a new vehicle for down there?
We do have the equipment on hand, so it's all operating costs for manpower to operate and to stay down at the station.
Okay. How would that, since Maricopa's in the mutual aid, how would that operation take place? Would our EMTs have to, go outside of Goodyear to make calls because they're part of the mutual aid system?
No, they wouldn't, because the EMTs down there would respond to the EMT accidents that happen once or twice a month along 238, and so they would just provide those services there. The Maricopa Fire Department provides the other services in their own town.
Okay, thank you.
I had one other question. Oh, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Regarding Mobile, and when you say 150 to 200,000, is that including the difference in the overtime issue? That the whole reason we kept the firemen from, Mobile in the first place was because it helped bring down all the overtime issue. So if we put 2 more back on a consistent daily basis, then what does that do to that overtime again for the regular part of Goodyear?
I believe we're taking that into account, Councilmember Osborne, but I need to get back to you on that specifically. Thank you.
John, the equipment we have in the Mobile area, is that housed now, or is it just standing out?
It's housed up here, yes.
No, okay.
No, it is
Oh, it's
housed.
not down there anymore, it's
No.
up here. Okay, thank
No,
you.
we moved everything out of there.
So the vehicles that are there is Maricopa's?
That's correct.
Okay.
So that building is leased, isn't it? That isn't ours.
It's not, yes, it is not ours, and yes, it is leased.
John, is that building
That cost.
on lease? I mean, do we have a long 2-3 year lease on that?
I believe that we do, but I'll have to let you know that.
Okay,
Mr.
so we don't
Giltner.
have to go get another lease.
No, the bank, we worked, we worked through all of that this last year. It took us a long time to get that because the bank was unwilling to provide it to Maricopa. We finally worked it out. We have a lease with the bank, the owners of the property.
That's through the bank because of the foreclosure
Yes,
on the property down there.
yes, it is.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, I'll move ahead. I want to have a little conversation, brief conversation on the rainy day funds. Again, this is just kind of to frame going into the budget this year, some of the things that are up for consideration, some of the critical needs that are out there that, once again, we're in structural deficit. We don't have extra funding coming in, and so just kind of, like I said, frame this discussion moving forward. To remind you about the rainy day fund, it is current practice is 4 months of ongoing expenditures from the general fund. It runs about $16.3 million is what I think. A couple elements make this up. The first one, the cash basis, that is by charter. And so roughly the $3 million is by charter required for this fund. Revenue stabilization part of it is another $3 million. And this is based on 10% of the annual sales tax revenues. And then the additional rainy day fund right today is about $10.2 million. And that is council contingency. And again, just to remind you that the $3 million is by charter, and the other ones can be changed, I guess you could say, reduced or increased.
Just a quick comment on that particular area. I know policy-wise, we try to, since construction sales tax is very volatile, we try to use the construction sales tax, and now's probably the best time as ever, even though it's so challenging, is to use it for one-time issues. With that, since that's the most volatile, and I think, I mentioned it at one time to explore, because right now our rainy day fund is at 33% of the operating revenue, and I would think that's a good number if we were using any part of the construction sales tax to, pay day-to-day operations. But with a policy that tries to, keep the construction sales tax for one-time revenue, I would like to maybe get some feedback, not necessarily right now, but feedback from the finance director, whether a rainy day fund of 22 to 25% of the general operating revenue would fall within those norms when in good times you back it up to 33, as that cushion, but you operate that rainy day fund within 20 to 22 to 25% of your operating revenue, assuming that the construction sales tax is not used for any part of operation. So just throw that out for consideration. Some of the numbers I saw earlier, I think that's probably norm, but I guess we can argue that. But again, not for right now. But look at it, and again, to me, that would be contingent on that the construction sales tax is not used for any part of operations.
We will address that with the council at a later date. And as you'll look at this table right now, you'll see that we have probably one of the highest requirements, other than Avondale's at 42%. But we're at 32%, and that is the next highest in the metropolitan area. So we believe that the 20 to 25% is a laudable goal, and that 33% perhaps is a good goal if you're in good times. But the rating houses do not have a concern with us lowering it if we have a plan to lower it down to the 20% level, as long as we don't go below that and we go over a phased period. So we could use part of the rainy day fund as a supplement to our budget considerations this year and take a look at what that level should be.
And again, I would like to get some feedback from the, finance director on how it affects bonds and a variety of other things. But to me, it's contingent on that we use the construction sales tax for one-time money, because that's the most volatile. And I feel really good the fact that our policy has been to not use the construction sales tax. Otherwise, that big drop that we had a couple years ago, we'd be in serious trouble right now if for any reason we were using sizable portions of that for operation. So it's just consideration for the group, and that'll probably be a whole nother discussion, but just kind of throw that out there as a means to just get us in line with some of the others.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions on the comparative slide?
Here's the fun part.
Yep, here's Anna's going to continue on with a little bit of sales tax history and then get into, again, some comparative data with our neighboring cities on sales tax rate, and then some live scenario planning with different changes in the rates.
Okay. As Terry said, first I will just kind of give a background on the dashboard. It was created by staff using the 5-year forecast. It is the same 5-year forecast that's been used in prior budget presentations. We have made slight revisions, however, primarily in fiscal year 15-16 for consistency. The dashboard will show you general impacts of revenue and rainy day fund changes, but the dashboard is a forecast. The numbers in it are a forecast. They can show you trends of what might happen if changes are made, but they are not exact outcomes. It should not be used as a budgeting tool, obviously, or a way to balance the budget, but as a guide to estimating impacts and changes to revenue. It's a tool to address council's goals, particularly in revisiting the increase in the general sales tax rate in fiscal year 12. It is a tool that will continuously help you to continuously monitor revenues, deliver quality services and programs, and help the council have the least amount of burden on residents. The components of the dashboard are listed on this slide. The categories are the retail sales tax at 2.5%, restaurant tax at 4%, hotel tax at 5%, construction sales tax at 3.5%, and the rainy day fund, or the 4 months operating estimates. The dashboard will show the impacts of tax rate and rainy day fund changes to the structural deficit. And I'll just briefly, I know we've seen all these slides before, so I'll kind of just briefly go through the history of the adopted sales tax rates. In 1987, we established the 2% general sales tax rate and the 4% hotel, restaurant, and bar tax rate. In 1995, established a 2-tier tax rate for single item purchases greater than $2,000 at 1.2%. In 2004, the Tax Policy Task Force made recommendations that became effective in 2005. These were to increase the hotel tax rate from 4 to 4.5% and increase the construction sales tax rate from 2 to 3.5%. We also reduced the combined property tax rate from the upper limit of 210 to down to 160, and maintained sales tax rate on restaurant and bars and the general sales tax rate. In 2009, general sales tax was increased from 2 to 2.5, and the hotel tax rate was increased from 4.5 to 5%. Here's where we talk about the number of rental units. The number of rental units was reduced from 3 to 2. And we established a use tax for purchases made outside the state or in unincorporated areas. And council did direct review of these in 2012. This is just a chart to show you, again, it's alphabetical order, so we are in the middle in that box. It shows you the different tax rates. Hotel motel taxes are inclusive of all additional tax rates. Sometimes they have different tax rates that you have to combine together. So this just kind of shows you valley-wide. With that brief review, if there are any questions, we'll go on to the dashboard. On the next few slides, we'll show you a few scenarios. The scenarios are from internal discussions and considerations discussed in past council meetings. These are a few that we thought we'd throw out on the table just to start the discussion today. They're not the only options or choices that you can discuss, just scenarios we thought of, staff worked on to start creating the dialogue. The three scenarios we're just going to show you examples of on the screen before we go into the live demonstration are reducing the general sales tax rate by 0.05% annually beginning in 12/13. This was just a way to step down the tax rate that we looked at. And in the second scenario, we reduced the restaurant sales tax rate by 0.25% annually beginning in 11/12, so beginning this next fiscal year. And finally, since there has been quite a bit of council discussion, we looked at reducing the tax on groceries by 0.25% over a 2-year period. And as you'll see on the slides and on the dashboard, we haven't broken out this food for home consumption sales tax revenue, as we only have a range and not precise estimates, and we'll discuss this in a later slide.
So what is our food tax now?
It's the same as the retail sales tax.
It's the same as retail?
Correct.
Okay, so we would drop that by a quarter.
Correct. That was one of the scenarios that we just kind of looked at and put in here for discussion.
Just one quick question, and I don't know if we can answer it now, but in a prior life, we're in the state collection system, which means the state gives us a code, a 2-letter code and a number that determines what rate and where you file under. And unfortunately, like the others that collect their own, they can send out specific, codes targeting those individuals. If you have a company that reports in 5 or 6 different jurisdictions, they're picking various codes off of a chart. And it sometimes can be confusing because we have multiple codes. And again, maybe it's a question for Larry or Joe Lewandowski. But I can tell you in the past, I made a living on cities in the state collection system that had multiple rates and codes because people just didn't understand. And when they had questions, they would always go to the lowest rate. So my question is if we pick on, say, groceries, for example, and I laud I applaud the work because, again, I believe that it's regressive. But will that create an administrative nightmare for our auditor, which creates another lower code, and not so much for the food stores, because they will program that in, but new businesses that come on board that try to figure out our state collection system where they turn around and say, hey, maybe the entire rate is 2.25, so you have Lewandowski constantly chasing those businesses and sending them letters saying, no, our only food is taxed at 2.25. And again, as a prior life, I know as a former tax auditor, that was always a problem. Am I off track on that, or has that improved over the years, Larry?
I guess what I'll comment is that 2 cities have adopted a 2-tiered rate for the food sales tax, which in effect this would be. Both of those cities are within or are on their own collection system, not part of the state collection system. So while I think those issues are valid, they exist with our multiple tiered structure regardless. And I think that that's a part of what we would have to work on if we were to go that route.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. When we bring down the general sales tax rate, one of the examples is 0.05, does that bring down the restaurant and all the hotel taxes well by that 0.05? Do they all go down by that? Because you said part of it was built into the hotel.
Well, when we get into the dashboard, this is just one example. It kind of shows we can break that out.
I think the question, though, is since we tax by categories, that it wouldn't take down the restaurant tax unless you lowered it by that rate, because restaurant's a separate category taxed at 4. It's not 2 plus 2, it's 4. So you would have to actually go into that specific category and change the rate.
Yeah, thank you. Because she said something about the hotel being inclusive, and I didn't, if that knocks that one down too.
Some other cities might have different taxes, different rates that you have to add together.
Okay.
So there's a couple in there that we just had to kind of put together, and you might be on a website or something and think it's different. But
Okay, I just
that's
want to
what
be
we
sure.
had to- Yeah. I didn't know.
I have a question on control. I'm trying to use an example, and I hate to use any dealer that's here in Goodyear, but supposing a dealer sells a large item like a car, not saying it would be a car, but there are other items in that are above that, in that large category.
Big diamond.
And they are a chain company. They have other dealers in Phoenix and out in the county and all over the place. And yet they sell one in Goodyear, whatever that item is, and it's a $7,000 or $8,000 item, or maybe $10,000. How do we track the fact that it's actually sold in Goodyear? I mean, that's. I just saw some things, and I got a little suspicious about where this stuff is being sold from, even though it is sold in Goodyear.
If the sale takes place in Goodyear, it would be taxable.
How do we track it, though?
We actually get tax returns from those businesses. So when I say if the sale took place in Goodyear, if you use a car dealer as an example, it would be from the dealers that are in Goodyear. If, on the other hand, a car was sold from a dealer, say, in Avondale, it would be taxable in Avondale. If a car is bought from a dealer that is not in any city within Arizona, then it would be subject to a use tax.
I understand that.
Okay, so that's where that would be collected, but it's really the point of sale that generates where that happens, and that's normally at the dealer lot when you're
I know
talking
that
vehicles.
that is the way it's supposed to work. But in this particular situation, the person said, I said, well, how are you taxing that? He says, oh, I tax them all at this percent. He says, I've worked in several stores all over Phoenix area, and I use the same tax.
Well, then you might want to give it to Joe Lewandowski to take a look at.
Because this is what bothered me was, how do we know we're getting our tax? And how do we track it?
We do get journals that give us details. Those are very limited in their availability due to confidentiality. Our sales tax auditor is the person that controls the data in those journals, reviews that data, compares to the businesses, and makes sure it makes sense. We do not
We have
get.
to take their word for it.
We could choose to audit those businesses. We have a sales tax auditor that could go out and audit those businesses and does do some audits that would do that.
Okay.
Larry, while you're there, how, you see some of these stores that say, we are going to pick up the sales tax for you. How is that handled?
They actually have to run a calculation when they do that to be able to pay the sales tax. They have to recalculate what the sale is, and basically it becomes a part of their cost. It's a backwards mathematical calculation.
And how is that reported then to the state?
It is reported to the state and back to the city at the gross sale that's adjusted through all of that calculation.
Okay, thank you.
you could report that dealer to the sales tax auditors so we could sick them on them. And in case they were, it was a large item.
Yeah. Realize that. And I'll consider that.
Okay, moving on. Here's the example that we discussed earlier with reducing the general sales tax rate by 0.05% annually. You can see on the screen, this is the same dashboard that you've seen in the November council work session. So what we did was went through fiscal year 12-13, took it down from 2.5 to 2.45 and continued that each year through. So you can see that there on the retail sales tax line, and then the results below on the total difference in the structural deficit impact lines. So that carries through each year. Next scenario that staff looked at was reducing the restaurant and bars tax rate by 0.25% each year until 15-16. So each year we stepped it down, starting in 11-12, we stepped it down 3.75, 3.5, 3.25, and then down to 3, and carried that 3 through. So you see down here, the restaurant and bar sales tax is less. The general sales tax rate, by reducing it 0.05, would be almost $500,000, whereas reducing restaurant and bar sales tax by 0.25 is almost $300,000. So you see those differences listed there on the 2 rows.
John?
Yes.
Based on what we know, or the good news that we know about sales and restaurant taxes, would it be feasible for the council to seriously consider a reduction in the sales tax and the restaurant tax at this stage?
In both?
Yeah.
I think that's only a decision that you all can make. I think that we can make anything work that you adopt. I believe that the reason we show in the general sales tax rate the reduction occurring in 12-13 is because that's when the council has told us that we need to relook at that.
Right.
And in the restaurant, because of the smaller number, we show that decrease next year. So we could adopt that. Could we do both of them? If we lowered the 0.05 in 12 and in the general sales tax and did the 0.25 next year in the restaurant tax, yes, I believe we could do it. I think the type of discussion that you all need to have, however, is, and I just offer this as a suggestion. The restaurant scenario. The restaurant sales tax. Restaurants have been going up tremendously, as we reported last night. Last month, the restaurants went up 23.62% in one month over a month. And that's been going on month after month for as long as we can see back in our records. Restaurants are, and we saw the number earlier, that they're at the highest level ever. So it is not like the sales tax on restaurants, although it's unpopular in some circles. The fact that you have to consider that restaurants are partly paid for by non-residents and partly paid for by residents. So is that the most effective way you have to lower the residents' sales tax impact or not? If you take the general sales tax rate, that also is one that is 53%, I believe, was the number that we came up with in 2002, that 53% of the tax was paid by non-residents, or maybe it was reversed, but part of it is paid for by non-residents. So you have to look at which one of the sales taxes will have the most meaningful impact to Goodyear residents.
And that's why I suggested the food tax, the grocery food tax, back in June, because that is going to affect just about every resident.
I have a question.
That's food for thought.
Well, mine's all on
No
food
pie.
right now. I agree with the food tax is very regressive, but I have a problem with looking at 11% tax on a restaurant bill. I would like a combination, maybe a slower drop
Oh,
in both of those. Both of those. I personally, I'm looking at all this. I was blown out of the water. I started looking at the property taxes had we not lowered them. But a lower, and then maybe if we could look at it, like make sure it's on our radar for like 6 months. We don't wait to come back, and we can say, hey, you know, economy is getting better. It's not getting better, and can we tinker with it that easily if we bring it back every quarter or every 6 months? I don't know what financially is good because I don't want to do the problem you were saying where it's like we send all the merchants into.
I don't think you can do it that quickly. I think that we would look at, for example, any tax that you would come up with a new figure would be approved on July 1st, and that would then go into effect September 1st, because it will take 3 months to notify the state to get the new tax implemented. So I don't think you can change it every 3 months. I think that would be unfair to the merchants. However, we can look at, if you look at this and come up with a plan, say over the next 5 years, just for example, we're going to lower the restaurant and bars to 3.0% over these increments. Then we can track that and bring the actions to you at the time that it's necessary in order to get it approved to the state so that they can lower it in time to make that effect. If it comes up that, whoops, the economy is turning south again, we can come back to the council and say, for example, if we're at 3.5%, we can say, you know, we really question going down to the 3.25. Do you want to take another look at this, or do you want us to proceed in that fashion? So,
Yeah, because I'd like both of those seem high to me, but if it comes down to it, I agree with Joanne that I think the food is definitely the one that really gives me the most heartburn. You know, if we could do a combination and then look at it, and then if it gets bad, I'd like to save the food, keep it lower longer. I don't know if it works with the numbers.
well, the numbers, as I recall, Anna, it's 1.1 million is our best estimate for a half a cent.
Correct.
For food. So that's our best estimate, but it's just purely swag. But at $1.1 million for a half a cent, so if you did 0.25%, I assume it would be half of that, so $550,000 or $600,000. And if that's the direction that the council wanted to go, to take it down to, say, the 2% level, or, yeah, 2% level, to bring that tax on groceries back to where it was in 2009, I mean, that's certainly something that we can take a look at. Or if you want to even say, okay, that's a little bit too big of a bite because we have so many other needs here, let's take a look at 0.25% down the first year, then 0.25% again. So we can play with the numbers in that way. That's what's so great about this dashboard.
John, just so I understand it, if you're saying that every 0.5% of sales tax is $1 million, if for food,
Yes.
is worth $1 million in revenue, is that correct?
That's correct.
That's our best estimate at this point in time.
We actually do have a range, and that was the next slide that comes up. No one really has a great way to estimate what the food for home consumption sales tax would be. We've talked to a number of other cities and looked at how they've estimated. Phoenix, since they just implemented a sales tax on their food for home consumption, 0.5% for us, using their line of estimating, would be about the $1.1 million, $1 to $1.1 million annually. Other methods we have from other cities that we talked to, they had the 0.5% for us could be about $500,000.
Okay.
So there's really a large range. We don't really know, and
That's fine.
no matter
That's
who we
fine.
talked to, no one really had a great way to estimate, or they
Okay.
hadn't estimated.
Another question. You have the mall worked into, estimated mall sales tax worked into the 14-15 budget and beyond. Do you have anything, the mall is going to do construction during the 12-13, 13-14 period of time. Do we have, I'm trying to figure out where's the construction sales tax number that reflects them building 300,000, 400,000. I'm not sure what the number is.
I believe it'll be I believe that it'll be $100 to $200 million initial construction. That would produce somewhere between at 200 million, because we did work on the 303 construction. That will produce about $7.3 million in construction sales taxes. So let's say that it would produce around 3 to 4 million
Per year.
over a 2-year period.
So, and that would be in the 12, 13, and 13, 14 time frame, is that correct?
The time frame would be 12, 13, 13, 14, but remember, as the conversation was earlier, that's one-time money.
I understand
This
that.
shows the structural deficit. That will not impact
right.
anything on this chart. So
But
that
what I'm saying is, in 12, 13, you get $3 million of construction sales tax. In 13, 14, you get another $3 million of construction sales tax. In 14 and 15, you get $6 million in general sales tax that basically gives you your $3 million ahead of where you are because there's no more construction.
Understood.
And then it just keeps, the mall just keeps, throwing off sales tax. And again, and that includes the 50% rebate to pay for the bonds, et cetera, for the road improvements and all that other stuff.
Yes,
that we
it
did
does.
that.
Yes.
So what I'm inferring here is that you have construction sales tax that's going to provide you with $3 million additional dollars one time. You can offset the food tax using some of that money, and then 3 years later you're going to still generate $5 million because you gave up $1 million in food tax.
Understanding that, but what the dialogue that we haven't had in this whole model is one-time expenditures that could include capital replacement, that could include street maintenance and so forth.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is we've been using construction sales tax all along and tossing it into the general fund. We've
Since
used
2009.
Yeah, well, that's for the last 2 years when we've had crises. When we were fat and had 22 million of construction sales tax, we went out and did capital projects. So what the mayor has said of trying to separate it out, we're still commingling those funds. And by this estimate, you can actually move ahead. We're going to make more money over the long term if we actually lower the food tax.
I guess what we were suggesting in this, in the earlier conversation in the rainy day fund, the city manager's comments on the rainy day fund were, if the council were looking at reducing a revenue base, be it the food sales tax or another revenue base, let's say I'm going to use $500,000 a year for argument, that if you did that using the rainy day fund as the source of repaying that, you would be very consistent with other valley cities. You would be consistent with what the rating agencies, and I think from a financial planning perspective, I would feel more comfortable using that basis to accomplish the same objective.
Okay, but what the other thing we have to look at is a year from now, I believe the state 3-year 1 cent tax goes away, and so that's going to drop or is it 2 years from now?
2 years from now, because it's a 3-year tax.
So we've been 1 year into that tax already.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so 2 years. So in 13, 14, that tax may go away unless the voters decide that they're going to fund something with it. And the other thing I want to talk about is we've had a 4% restaurant tax since 1987. And as John has alluded, our restaurants, one, are discretionary spending, and two, we're going to keep getting more and more. This is a valuable set of revenues. Why are we going to try to tinker with that when if anything, we could tinker with the most regressive tax, which is on food, and if anything, we should look at reducing the general, the general tax rate on all purchases, but we should leave the restaurant and hotel tax. I mean, we're not even at the top end of this, and we're quote unquote going to be a destination city. We should take advantage of the tourists that do come here. I'm done. for a while.
For a while.
John, this might not be very popular, but I know we were talking about the billboards and revenue. What would be the yearly revenue on that to offset a sales tax? And it looks like we've got 2 years before the mall comes in that we'd really have to get some revenue for get it in the black.
Councilmember Loretano, as I recall, the yearly revenue is approximately $176,000.
So it would just be the one time.
The one time is the $1.1 million that the council will be considering next month, I believe it is.
So that something like that would not be enough to fund a cut in food tax more than a year.
No, not really, no.
Okay.
The one suggestion I had made, I guess, to the city manager at one time is my feeling on that $1.1 million. I'd rather see it amortized over 3 years to try to get us over the hump instead of using it all at once. My preference would be take the $1.1 million and split it in three, so now you have an annual revenue of about almost $500,000 for 3 years. That gets you over the hump for things start picking up with the mall, et cetera. So again, I just have a different perspective of spending the 1.1 all at once versus evening it out over 3 years, because I think after 3 years with the mall, things start going in the other direction. So anything that we can kind of gap that in that period of time. That's just my own personal perspective on that.
And not to make this more complex, but one thing we can't forget is that the mall, we have an agreement with the mall. I believe that they will fund 2 police officers per year at the time they come in for 8 years, I think it is. We are going to need a lot more than 2 police officers when the mall comes in, because as you all know, and Gary has been at Comstat recently, the highest crime rate area are commercial areas. And so we're going to need to ramp up our police force as we get ready to ramp up for the mall. So that's something that we have to consider also.
Well, I still believe that the way to start this is by separating the groceries from retail sales tax, and my preference is to start there. And if it means the 0.25% to begin, I understand that. And if it's after we see 6 months to a year, depending on which way we go, I guess is how we're going to find out if within the next year we can go down another 0.25%, or we realize that you've seen 2 different ways that it figures, one from Phoenix and one from someone else. So I guess until we do it, we're just not going to know. When it comes to the restaurant sales tax, yes, it's been in existence for a very long time. And yes, it's not that 11 point whatever percent is all of Goodyear. We all know that. That's state and everything else. But it's still too high, and really when it comes down to it, when you think about it, it's just not a competitive number. And whether we wait on that to other years, I understand, and I would say starting with regular retail sales tax next after food could be looked at. But I understand what you're saying, Gary, that and people coming to town and tourists and that type of thing. But just looking at it, it's just not a good number. It's just not, and that's my opinion. So I would still prefer to start with groceries and then go another year, see where we pan out there, and then within that year, if we look at regular retail sales tax, then we do 0.25% there, or 0.25. And that's just, as we go along. But I think that it is going to take 4 to 5 years to bring us down. And, we really haven't even brought up the construction sales tax. I mean, there's another one that we are extremely high on. And if we were to change that, would it make a difference? I guess I don't know. I don't know how that, personally, in the next couple of years, it probably won't affect us. It's so little as it is right now anyway. But would it help development? I guess that would be the question.
Could I interrupt, Ms. Mayor? I want to ask a technical question. If we were to lower the food sales tax by 0.25%, so the food was 2.25%, and everything else was 2.5%. With a year from now, when we're sitting here today and you have 6 months hard numbers, would you have a good handle on a percentage so that you'd have a pretty good number that you could project out into the future?
Yes, that gives a much better database. What happens is today, when someone that sells food, whatever business sells food, it goes on one line, the same line as a retail, the gross sales does. If you change that rate, an additional line will be added, and that's where they'll report the food. So it creates information available to us to better estimate, and it's based on our information.
Well, until we do it, we're not going to know.
I sure would be supporting taking food down to a 0.25% for next year, and we can learn from the data. I don't think if you're saying that it could be somewhere between $500,000 and it could be between $250,000 and $750,000, I think that's something that we can budget for with some contingency money, and we can learn. It would be a really good learning experience for us, so that we could have a better handle on how our taxes are generated by what categories.
Well said.
Okay, thank you.
With that, we'll move on to the dashboard. And in the dashboard, like I said, it's not going to show the food for home consumption just because like I said, we have a range. We don't have an exact figure in there. So food for home consumption would have to be a separate issue from the dashboard. But with that, I would open it up to Vice Mayor and how you want to proceed with this.
Well, I think you've gotten a variety of suggestions on here to go through it. And just for my own, I guess, 2 cents worth, I think the restaurant is the biggest anomaly out there. But with that being said, I tend to agree that the one that's probably going to have the biggest impact is probably the food. I agree with you there. My biggest concern on the food has always been, not that it's regressive, is administratively, is whether being in the state collection system, and again, old habits are hard to break as a former tax auditor, is that going to create a burden? And what I'm hearing is probably not. Is that kind of, I mean, you're going to be able to take care of that if we do that, to track, to make sure that people aren't reporting under the 2.25 under the wrong classification. That's my biggest concern, because I made a living many years ago as an outside consultant just picking up codes that people were filing under the wrong codes. So, I mean, if we feel comfortable with that, I do agree that the food is most regressive. But at some point, I would love to see that restaurant be competitive. And I realize it's probably not going to affect the bottom line on the restaurants. But when I see 4, and I see next door neighbor 2.5, I like to see that. But I can probably agree with most of them here with the food, and apparently you don't have that in there because it's hard to estimate. So I don't know what to suggest with you there, except to on your dashboard, because I'm hearing quite a bit of consensus here, at least on the food issue. But I guess go ahead and start working through your models at various points on the general, the food, and the sales tax, just so we can get a general idea. But from my perspective, if you throw numbers out there, the bottom line is the numbers. I mean, if you're looking at $500,000 to $1 million, that's going to impact that if you put a hard number in there to get an idea, what that range is going to be. So, with that being said, I guess unless there's a burning discussion or issue here with others on where you want to start, I guess leave it with Anna to start working it.
If I could just summarize what I've heard you and the rest of the council say, is that what we'll be looking at is lowering the food sales tax by 0.25% next year, and put that out over future years to lower that further. We can then measure that as we go along to see what its impact is going to be, and then you can make decisions as to how the finances are going, as to whether you want to keep going on the food, or you want to keep going on the general sales tax for everybody, or whether you want to attack the restaurant. But as of next year, so for the budget, we will look at lowering the food sales tax by 0.25%.
Is that kind of the Seems the consensus.
It's for me.
I'm happy with that, even though we can't make a decision
Only
today.
concern I have is I like to see us look at expenditures and see where that, I know we're down to bare bones from what I'm hearing, but I still think we really need to take another look at that.
And Councilmember Cavalier, you will during the next few months. We will be going over all of that for you.
Yeah.
So.
But we get a consensus on the direction that the city manager just mentioned?
So 0.25 for a couple more years, and we'll take a look at that.
See where it goes.
Did we, when you said 0.25 and then 0.25, so getting it down to 2%, right?
2 years from now would be 2%.
Okay, and then after that, so on a third year, then the discussion will be whether it's regular sales tax or restaurant or a
Yes.
combination of whatever we can do. Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
Assuming some of us are still here.
that sounds good to me.
Okay, thank you.
So that provides, okay, great.
Thank you. Dick, you're going to get out of here on time.
I'd just like to say one thing, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate some of the candidates being here this evening to witness what has transpired here. Because budget, I know for all of you that are running for office, is very, very important. And I myself am very, very appreciative of you being here this evening. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, it's your floor.
If that's, we're done, right?
They're done.
Okay, so basically, we're done with the workshop. If you'd like further discussions, we welcome you to have that. Otherwise, we would suggest that you adjourn. Adjourn, Rourke, and then go into a special meeting, right? Okay.
Well, let me just double check. Is there anything that anybody wants to add at this point to the work session? We pretty good? Okay, with that, we'll close this meeting. Adjourn.